What's up? Welcome back to the Metalhead Car Show. At this time now, when you think of classic cars, you're still thinking 1960s, 1970s, or perhaps even 1980s. But as time goes on, there's always going to be new classic cars. Classics that we didn't think about as classics 10 years prior, but now we do. So today I want to go over 5 cars that I think will be deemed classic cars in the future. If there's any you think I have missed, let me know in the comments, but for now, let's get right into it. Let's start off with the 2012 Chevy Camaro ZL1. This may seem like an odd pick because there has been better ZL1s since that, but I think it's going to be this one purely because it was the year one car. Not like the parts company, but this was the first ZL1 since 1971, I think. It was kind of just this really cool car. It was using a lot of the parts from the Cadillac CTS-V project, along with the Corvette ZR1 project, and it made this 580 horsepower track weapon of a Camaro. It can do 60 in the high 3s, it can do quarter mile in the 12s, and you can go find one right now for like $45,000, maybe 50. Which that's an obscene amount of power with a manual transmission and fat tires, and that sounds like this. For that money. I'm not the biggest GM fan in the world, but this is one of those cars I would love to have because I think it's such an awesome bang for the buck. And I think long term, that's both not going to last, and this will be a genuine classic. Next up, the Ferrari 458 Italia. Now, I think the 458 Italia is going to be rapidly getting to the status, but I wanted to add it to the list purely because it has this kind of legacy behind it. The 458 Italia was the final naturally aspirated, high-revving Ferrari that sounded like a Ferrari. And Ferrari has made better cars after this, like the 488 and the F8, but if you look at those are the exact same chassis as the Italia. So between that super high revving screaming V8, which made like 560 horsepower, and that incredible chassis which Ferrari kept using for a few different cars after that, Ferrari may have made better cars than the Italia, they may have made faster cars than the Italia. I don't think they'll ever make a car like the Italia ever again. And for those reasons, it's going to be a classic long term. Next up, the 2014 Shelby Mustang GT500. Now I probably could have said GT500 and just left it there, but I want to talk about this car. The 2013-2014 GT500 was this huge step up from the cars previous to it. Unlike the cars previously, which all used variations of a Ford 5.4 liter supercharged V8, this used a Ford 5.8 liter supercharged V8. That may not seem like a huge deal, but it is the only Ford to use that engine. And that engine made 662 horsepower, this much torque. It did a 0 to 60 of 3.5 seconds as long as you get to hook up properly and shift at the right timing. It did a quarter mile time in the 11s, and given enough space, it would do 205 miles per hour. I remember watching this thing when Motor Trend was doing the greatest drag race of all time. And when they did this drag race, the Mustang came 4th overall and was beaten out by a newer McLaren at the time, a Aventador and a Nissan GTR. And despite the GTR beat it, the Mustang actually ended with a higher trap speed, which meant give it like another quarter mile, the Mustang would have flown past that GTR. Along with that, Ford did put a lot more time into brakes and suspension, but unfortunately this thing in America still came with a live rear axle and brakes that would overheat if used too much. So it wasn't quite the track weapon it always could have been, but it was kind of the craziest GT500 ever made. Now I know the new one makes a lot more power and it's way, way better, but this thing had that complete insanity to it. That was just too much power for the chassis and a manual transmission and a real clutch pedal and a shitload of power, and we're not going to see that from a GT500 ever again. So I know I gave the Camaro credit for being the first ZL1, but I want to give this one the credit for being the final GT500 of that style, because we're not going to get crazier than that. Next up, and the most expensive car on the list, the Bugatti Veyron. Now, I don't need to say much about the Veyron. Everyone knows about the Veyron. It was the pinnacle of performance when it came out in 2008, 87. But I wanted to add it to the list purely because I think this is going to have kind of a McLaren F1 sort of thing going on with it. As of right now, it's really expensive to own and really expensive to maintain. But I think these are going to get a kind of legacy status to them. And through time, they're just going to get more and more expensive. They dipped down in value a little while ago. They were actually under $1 million at one point. But I think those days are long behind us, and they're only going to get more and more expensive. Now, I might be able to see any of the cars you mentioned prior at over $500,000 or sitting around it. But the Bugatti Veyron, I think, is going to be one of these cars that I think we're going to see up to $10 or $15 million down the road. Down the road. Calm down. And I think it already is a classic, but long term, I think it's going to be one of these icon legacy cars. Last one on the list, the really early, like 2015 manual Hellcat Challenger. When the Hellcat cars came out in 2015, it was a game changer. It was this car that you could actually kind of get into and buy that made 707 horsepower. And again, as I've said with other cars, they have improved it since then. But I'm looking at the early Hellcat Challengers in particular because you can actually buy these with a manual transmission. 6-speed manual transmission with a heavy wire-driven clutch. So much like what I said with the GT500 and the ZL1, it's kind of the end of the manual, super high-powered, super big and heavy muscle cars that have way more power than the chassis is actually made to handle. And I think it's going to be those cars that are going to go way up in value long term and become these crazy classic cars. Will we see $1 million 2015 Challenger with a manual? Maybe. Honestly, who knows? It's never going to have the rarity status of like some of the older Mopars that are like one of 6 because somebody ordered a 426 Hemi in their 1967 Dodge Coronet wagon. I don't know if we're going to get to that kind of crazy status, but it will get that super classic status. I want to know, what do you think? Do you agree with me with my list? And what cars did I miss? What cars will be these ultra collectible, super rare, classic cars down the road? Thank you all so much for watching. Like, subscribe, if you enjoyed what you've seen. I post on Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, and I'll see you later.